Simply because I'm here doesn't mean that your loved one is dead. The silence in the room when I began to speak was complete. They were keying on every word that I had to say. They hadn't had any information. They knew something probably terrible had happened. And as I began to talk, family began to sob over to a little bit to my right. And I made the mistake of looking over and identifying with that family that was sobbing, that were all huddled together there. And my emotions overwhelmed me. I simply could not help myself, and I began to cry. And I told myself, Ray, you can't do this. You've got to be strong enough to stand up here and help these people. You can't be up here bawling. But I couldn't help it. The emotion was too overwhelming. And so I began to cry to a point that I couldn't talk to them. And so as I began to cry, others began to cry, and in about a minute I had the entire room bawling. So I got enough composure about myself, and I began speaking to them, and I told them that I would be there every day to give them information. I says, I'll be back at 9:30 in the morning. I'll be back at 3:30 this afternoon, and I will tell you what I can.
He made a promise to us, and that promise was every day he would be there, twice a day, to tell us all of the information that he had, and that we would be told first before anyone else would be told. And that was critical to us. All we asked for was the truth, and he certainly delivered that. When you're grieving and when you're in shock, you have to have somebody you can trust. You have to have somebody that will come to you, be honest, be truthful, regardless of how bad it is, and tell you what's going on. The worst thing you can do in a disaster situation, in my opinion, is to not do anything. We had people all over the United States and all over the world come here to help us, and they made a huge difference in my life. To this day, they make a difference in my life because of how I was treated in that block of days, and it's something I'll obviously never forget.
The following year, TWA 800 crashed in the ocean off Long Island, killing 230 people. In spite of the huge number of fatalities, Dmort was not called in.
Dmort was not activated. Officially, we were never activated for TWA 800, but we were there to assist the medical examiner's office. And one of the big problems that evolved was with the families, because people weren't talking to them, and they were getting information for the first several days, mainly from the media.
Initially, many of the families received the remains of their loved one. They were able to go home and have a funeral. But there were a lot of people that were at that Ramada Hotel for 3 weeks, every day, just waiting for some small piece of information.
Fortunately, Tom Shepherdson was at that hotel one night to help a grieving family.
I ended up going with the gentleman to his room. He just wanted to talk. He had just been told that his daughter was officially dead. He had been officially notified from the ME's office at the family center. And he just didn't know how to tell his wife, basically, that she was never going to see her daughter because they had told her that she was non-viewable. I talked with him for several hours, and I told him, I've seen all the bodies. I said, I don't know which one right now is your daughter. And I said, if there's any way possible, I'll see what I can do. And when I went back, and I got back up to the ME's office, maybe about 2:30 in the morning, and I went through the file and got his daughter's file and looked at it, and she was non-viewable. To put a family through looking at what that would have destroyed them for the rest of their life. But her arm was completely non-scraped or anything, her right arm. So we had already released him to a local funeral home for shipment back home. And I got the funeral home at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I'm going to have a family coming over, and I told them the name of the family, and they said, well, she's non-viewable, and I said, oh yeah, she is. She's viewable. I said, you lay her out in the casket in the morning. I said, cut a hole in the body bag and bring her arm out and put a sheet over the body bag and put her arm out there. And I arranged to have 2 police officers take the husband and wife over to the, I get teary-eyed when I think about it, but take them over to the funeral home. And they were able to sit there with their daughter's hand and hold it for several hours.
Air crash victims and their loved ones deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. But most families did not get the support that they needed. They demanded better treatment, and the federal government responded with the Family Assistance Act.
The Family Assistance Act was passed October of '96, and it took an act of Congress to give families impacted by air disasters better treatment. And basically, this act of Congress provides for prompt notification for the families, a return of personal effects, access to information from the safety board, to have counselors and have a family assistance center on site to assist the families all ways possible. It's very important to have the most complete recovery possible of personal effects. I have a friend, and unfortunately, the only thing that she received was the button from her son's military uniform, and that button means everything to her. And unfortunately, it's the tangible proof that yes, her son Jay was on that flight. But every piece of personal effect can have a great meaning for people. It's very important to know that when you're going to a funeral, that you're actually burying your loved one. In a disaster, unfortunately, body parts become commingled, and you really want to know that what's in that grave is your loved one, that your loved one has been identified.
Every member of the Dmort team brings special skills. It is the job of the scientists to identify the dead. Some disasters are so destructive that the victims are reduced to fragments. Every body part recovered is a clue.
In order to get the remains back to the right families, you need the forensic people, the pathologists, the anthropologists, the odontologists, and you also need the fingerprint specialists, and now you need DNA people as well.
Fingerprints are unique. No two fingers of anyone in the world, past, present, and future, been found to be the same and never will be found the same. Because of my expertise in fingerprint identification and being able to compare a surface area the size of a pencil eraser and identify who that belongs to, makes my expertise a natural in identifying bits and pieces found at a disaster site.
Dentists are also important members of the team. Teeth, like fingerprints, provide essential clues for identification. Professors Frank and Julie Saul are physical anthropologists. They study human bones from ancient Mayan ruins. This skill also helps them to identify disaster victims.
Well, for us, we're puzzle solvers, and it's another puzzle to solve, but it's a puzzle that's not a frivolous puzzle. This is a puzzle that means something to someone, because we cannot undo this awful thing. We can just try to make it better for those that are still there. Our job is, for each unit of remains that comes to us, to try to find out as much as we can about the person that represents. The age, the sex, ancestry, stature, any identifying characteristics of any kind, and its condition, whether it's burned or unburned, fragmented, torn. And that information aids in identifying the person, but also helps in recreating what happened in the crash, so that once the people are identified, they know where they were and what the injuries were, and perhaps they can design planes better. So it's the puzzle, it's the challenge to us to use our knowledge to solve this puzzle, and then for the humanitarian aspect of it. It's a way to sort of pay back society by doing something that we can do.
The Sauls respond to their first disaster, Com Air Flight 3272.
The live picture you're looking at from Chopper 7 right now is the command post that they have set up at the crash scene there in Monroe County.
What role the weather played at this point is certainly undetermined.
The weather was really very, very bad, very, very cold. On the ground, it was something like minus 48 degrees below zero wind chill. And the plane went straight down into frozen ground. It was a very difficult thing for the emergency personnel to deal with, and then for Dmort to deal with. All of this aside from the sadness that it had happened in the first place.
But air crashes are so sudden and they're so dramatic. So families, when they get those initial calls, there is just no preparation for them in terms of what happens with that. But for the workers, those kinds of conditions are extremely difficult. For many of us, I mean, I had pneumonia after working the incident itself and was out of commission for several weeks. The south side of the hangar that we were using as a temporary morgue was just canvas that was ripped and torn through the years, and we had to put up makeshift plastic barriers just to try to keep the wind and the cold out. Comair was a tough crash because of the cold. It just permeated everything. And of course, for our job, everything we had to work with in terms of identifying remains, you had to first thaw it out.
In a situation like this, we need forensic anthropologists right at the crash scene to look at what is coming from the plane or coming from the area around the plane and make a determination as to whether or not these are human remains. It's terribly grim, and when you're doing something like this, you try not to think, in a sense, about what you're doing and focus on the fact that this is something that only your specialty can handle and something that just has to be done.
You push yourself right to the limit and beyond because there's so much to do and you have to do it as well and as fast as you can, and you cannot make a mistake.
Well, it's satisfying that what we can do can also help people.
Can make an impact on people's lives, a positive impact. It's not just esoteric academic
Because
knowledge.
the families are waiting. They're waiting. They know the person has died, but they're waiting to take the remains home.
Comair did have a family assistance center at a local hotel. They provided them information as much as possible. There was counseling services available. They were being provided information that they were doing everything possible to recover their loved ones.
As a matter of fact, the families requested to go to the crash site, and that request was honored.
In the town of Monroe, members of Dmort provided human kindness to families at the time of their greatest need.
We will often, at the request of the medical examiner, we will be the ones to do the official confirmation of death. No matter how many times you do that, whether it's your first time or your 300th time, it's never any easier. I was seated with the mom and with the dad of the person who had died, but also his wife and their 3-month-old. And I talked with them and tried to look at their feelings. And what happens then is they really start to remember things as they were, and they will describe in great detail this man that they all love so much and that they were already grieving and missing. So you sit and you feel their pain, and it becomes a part of your pain. We try to maintain that professional distance, but the truth is you can't do this with families and be so close to them without it really having an impact on you.
Monday, March 15th, 1999. The southbound Amtrak passenger train, the City of New Orleans, slams into a truck hauling steel at a Bourbonnais, Illinois grade crossing. 122 passengers and crew are injured. 11 people die.
The one thing that sticks out in my mind about that scene is the railroad track, actually. You know how big a railroad track is? It's, 4 to 5 inches tall and 3 to 4 inches wide, solid steel, and these tracks are just twisted like a spaghetti noodle. And that's the one thing that really stuck out in my mind about that scene is the massive force and impact that these people went through.
The metal itself was just shredded, and the sleeper car was impacted over the end of the engine. And that's where the people were. And then they were pulled apart, and then we climbed up inside. While a machine held the edge of that sleeper car so that it wouldn't roll. You know, these huge machines they used to move train cars around after an accident, it just delicately held onto the edge. I donned some protective clothing and climbed up in through the shredded metal up into the top of the sleeper car to recover what I could.
And told everybody not to tell me that she was doing this.
because I knew he wouldn't want me to do that. And then I climbed down in and underneath and to find all I could find, because it was hard for the volunteer firemen and the firemen they're accustomed to rescuing people, and this is beyond what they normally do. And they were wonderful to work with, but you see this tremendous destruction, the shredded metal, and the thought of being in there it's unimaginable.
We can't change the terrible things that happened when that Amtrak train collided with a truck hauling steel. But we were able, within a very short period of time, to return the remains of 11 individuals to their families.
We had some people say, well, there were only 11 fatalities to that. Well, we consider a mass disaster to be any disaster that occurs in any location that overtax the local resources. And in Bourbonnais, the coroner medical examiner there felt like this was going to tax his community, and therefore he felt the need for the resources to be brought in.
The morgue was activated for that incident, and it was the first time that we'd actually used this particular new morgue unit. The morgue is a very big operation. There are 7 of us who are called the DPMU team, come from all over the United States.
Each member of this team must be ready to respond at a moment's notice.
I was in the middle of a lake fishing with my son, and my pager went off, and I was crazy enough to have my cell phone with me, and it was Washington. They said, you have to get your plane in an hour. We all have to find ourselves at one location, and all of our supplies, which is a tractor trailer with 5 pallets on it, that we as a team have got to take these pallets off this truck and transform it into a portable morgue. I got bored the other night and I actually went through our inventory, a real rough count, and we've got close to 5,000 separate items. Everything from rubber gloves to full body x-ray machine. All the tools, everything imaginable to complete a full autopsy.
We have a computer network in the morgue, a wireless computer network, where we're able to go in and take antemortem data